Get your brats out of my house. Victoria screamed, her face twisted with rage as she shoved my children's backpacks into their trembling hands. I stood in shock, watching my sister-in-law push my kids toward the door while outside, the worst blizzard in decades raged through our small Minnesota town. Victoria, please, I begged, pulling my 10-year-old Emma closer to me as she started to cry. The roads are completely blocked. We can't leave in this weather. Not my problem, Amanda, she sneered, already turning away. I told James that letting you stay here was temporary. I need this space for my home office, and I'm done waiting. My brother James, Victoria's husband of 2 years, was away on a business trip. He'd insisted we stay with them after my house burned down 3 months ago, despite Victoria's obvious displeasure. Now, with him unreachable due to the storm, she'd seized her chance. At least let us wait until the storm passes, I pleaded, thinking of my youngest, 8-year-old Nathan, who was battling a fever. Nathan's sick, and it's 20 below out there. Victoria spun around, her designer sweater catching the light from her precious crystal chandelier. Should have thought about that before you overstayed your welcome. Besides, she smirked, maybe if you hadn't wasted money on those silly art classes for the kids, you'd have found your own place by now. My hands clenched into fists. The art classes were the only thing keeping my children's spirits up after losing everything in the fire. I picked up extra nursing shifts to afford them while simultaneously searching for affordable housing in our overpriced town. Fine, I said, my voice steady despite the fear and anger churning inside me. Let me just grab our coats from thee. Already packed them, Victoria interrupted, gesturing to a garbage bag by the door. Along with whatever other junk you had lying around. Now get out before you track more snow onto my imported rugs. I gathered our things with shaking hands, helping Nathan into his coat while Emma sniffled beside me. The children were still wearing their pajamas under their winter gear. Victoria hadn't even given us time to dress properly. As we stepped out into the howling wind, I heard the door lock behind us with a decisive click. Standing in knee-deep snow, I pulled out my phone, desperately searching for a signal. The screen remained stubbornly dark. The storm had knocked out cell service across the region. Mom, Nathan whimpered, his small body shivering despite the heavy coat. I don't feel good. I know, baby, I whispered, pulling him close. We're going to be okay. We just need to make it to Mrs. Sullivan's house. Our elderly neighbor lived just 3 houses down. She'd offered us a place to stay when the fire first happened, but I'd refused, not wanting to burden her. Now I prayed she was home. The wind cut through our clothes as we trudged through the snow, each step a battle against the elements. Emma clutched my hand while I half-carried Nathan, who was growing warmer with fever by the minute. The garbage bag of our belongings dragged behind us, leaving a trail in the snow. Mrs. Sullivan's porch light was like a beacon in the swirling white. I nearly cried with relief when she opened the door to my frantic knocking, her kind face horrified as she took in our situation. Good Lord, Amanda, get those babies in here right now. She ushered us inside, already calling for her grandson Michael to bring blankets. Did Victoria do this, in this weather? I nodded, too exhausted and cold to speak as she wrapped us in quilts and steered us toward her fireplace. Michael, who was staying with her during the storm, appeared with hot chocolate and concerned eyes. Nathan's burning up, I managed to say, my medical training kicking in despite my exhaustion. Do you have any children's Tylenol? In the bathroom cabinet, Mrs. Sullivan assured me. Michael, help Amanda get the children settled in the guest room. I need to make some calls. The next few hours passed in a blur of fever checks, warm baths, and quiet tears. Emma finally fell asleep curled against my side, while Nathan's fever slowly responded to the medication. Mrs. Sullivan insisted we take her guest room, brushing aside my weak protests. Did you call the police? Michael asked quietly after the kids were asleep. What Victoria did. That's got to be illegal. I shook my head. James gave her legal rights to evict us. The house is in her name, a wedding gift from their parents. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. My in-laws had always favored their son and, by extension, his wife. Still, Mrs. Sullivan interjected, her usually gentle voice hard with anger. There are laws about evicting children in dangerous conditions. When the storm passes, we're calling someone. I didn't have the energy to argue. Instead, I checked my phone again, hoping for a signal. Still nothing. James was probably still blissfully unaware in his warm Chicago hotel room, believing his perfect wife was taking good care of his sister and nieces. "Try to rest," Mrs. Sullivan urged, patting my hand. "Tomorrow's another day." But as I lay awake that night, listening to the storm howl outside and my children's congested breathing, I made a decision. This wasn't just about me anymore. My children deserve better than to be treated like unwanted baggage, cast aside at someone's convenience. I've been too nice, too understanding of Victoria's adjustment period to having us in her space. I'd overlooked her snide comments, her subtle digs about my parenting, her not-so-subtle hints about us leaving. I believed James when he said she just needed time to warm up to us. No more. Tomorrow, when the storm cleared, I would start making calls. Not to the police, but to the hospital administration where I worked. They'd been trying to convince me to take a position at their new facility in Minneapolis. I'd been hesitant to uproot the kids, but now it seemed like exactly what we needed. Victoria wanted us gone. Fine. But she'd learned that actions have consequences, and karma has a way of coming full circle. Little did I know just how true that would prove to be. 6 months passed faster than I expected. The move to Minneapolis had been a blessing in disguise. My new position as head nurse of pediatric emergency paid nearly double my previous salary, and the hospital's relocation package included 3 months of free housing while we settled in. Emma and Nathan thrived in their new school, making friends quickly and continuing their art classes at a local studio. The light had returned to their eyes, though they still had nightmares about that stormy night. Sometimes I'd find them curled up together in one bed, seeking comfort in each other's presence. I hadn't spoken to Victoria since that night, though James had called repeatedly once the storm cleared. His messages ranged from apologetic to angry, insisting I was overreacting by moving away. Victoria was just stressed, he claimed. She didn't mean it. "Come back. We can work this out." I blocked his number after the 10th call. Mrs. Sullivan kept me updated on the local gossip. Victoria had apparently transformed my old room into her Instagram-worthy home office the very next day, posting photos of the renovation as if nothing had happened. She'd even captioned one picture, "Finally getting rid of the clutter. #blessed #fresh start." The clutter being my children's belongings that she'd thrown into garbage bags. Then came the call that changed everything. I was reviewing patient charts when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Something made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail. "Amanda." Victoria's voice was barely recognizable, stripped of its usual condescension. "Please don't hang up." I remained silent, letting her squirm. I need your help," she continued, her voice breaking. "Everything's gone wrong. James left me, the house is being foreclosed, and I have nowhere to go." I leaned back in my chair, memories of that snowy night flashing through my mind. "That sounds like a personal problem, Victoria." "Please," she begged. "Your brother, he's been gambling. He lost his job months ago but kept it hidden from me. He took out loans against the house, maxed out all our credit cards. When I finally discovered everything, he just left, disappeared. The bank's giving me until the end of the week to get out. And this concerns me how." My voice was ice cold. I heard you're doing well in Minneapolis. That you have a big house now." She paused, and I could practically hear her swallowing her pride. "I need a place to stay, just until I figure things out. I have nowhere else to go." The irony was almost poetic. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You want to stay with me? After you threw my sick children out into a blizzard?" "I know what I did was terrible," she whispered. "I was horrible to you and the kids, but I'm desperate. Please, Amanda, I'm family." I thought about Emma and Nathan, how they'd shivered in the snow while Victoria locked the door behind us. How Nathan's fever had spiked dangerously high that night. How my children had cried themselves to sleep in a stranger's house, confused and frightened. "Family?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's interesting, Victoria? The night you kicked us out, I begged you to let us stay until the storm passed. Do you remember what you said?" Silence on the other end. "You said it wasn't your problem." "Well, guess what? Your problems aren't mine either." "Amanda, wait." "I have to go." I cut her off. "I need to pick up my kids from their art class. You know, the one you said I was wasting money on." Turns out Emma's quite talented. She just won a regional competition. The prize money is going into her college fund. "Please," he tried one last time. I have nowhere else to go, no family, no friends. Everyone turned their backs on me after what happened with James. I thought about the garbage bags she'd thrown our belongings into, the smirk on her face as she locked us out. Then I thought about what my mother would have done in this situation. She'd raised me to be kind, but she'd also taught me about self-respect. Actually, I said, I do have a suggestion for you. Call Mrs. Sullivan. She runs a women's shelter now, helped me get back on my feet after the fire. Before you so graciously offered us your spare room. Tell her I sent you. She helps people in crisis situations find temporary housing and job training. Victoria's breath caught. A shelter. But I can't. You can't what? Stay in a shelter? Why not? Is it beneath you? I kept my voice level. It's that or your car, Victoria. Your choice. But my home? That's not an option. Not now, not ever. I understand, she whispered, defeat heavy in her voice. I'm truly sorry, Amanda, for everything. I believe you are, I replied, now that you're the one in need. Goodbye, Victoria. Good luck with everything. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking slightly as I set down the phone. Part of me felt guilty. I'd been raised to help family in need. But a larger part remembered my children's tears, their confusion about why their aunt hated them so much. My phone buzzed again, a text from Mrs. Sullivan. Victoria just called, said you referred her. Don't worry, we'll help her get back on her feet, but we'll make sure she learns some valuable lessons along the way. Those who can't show kindness shouldn't expect to receive it freely. Kiss the kids for me, love Jane. I smiled, imagining Victoria's designer clothes and manicured nails in the shelter's dormitory. Maybe this would teach her the humility she so desperately needed. Maybe she'd learn that treating people with kindness wasn't optional, it was an investment in your own future. But that was her journey to take, not mine. I had a life to live, children to raise, and no room in my heart for toxic family members who only remembered my worth when they needed something from me. Looking at the clock, I realized it was time to pick up the kids. Emma would be excited to show me her latest artwork, and Nathan had a science project he wanted to discuss. These were the moments that mattered, not dwelling on those who tried to break us, but celebrating how much stronger we'd become. As I gathered my things to leave, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. 1 year later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Sunday breakfast when Emma called out from the living room. Mom, Aunt Victoria is on the local news. I walked over, wiping my hands on a dish towel, to see Victoria being interviewed outside Mrs. Sullivan's shelter. She looked different. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore simple business casual attire, and her face carried a humility I'd never seen before. After receiving help from the shelter last year, Victoria was saying, I realized I needed to give back. Now, as their new program coordinator, I help other women rebuild their lives. It's taught me that everyone deserves kindness and second chances, especially when they think they're above needing help. Nathan looked up from his spot on the couch. Is that the same aunt who made us leave in the snow? Yes, honey, I replied, watching Victoria describe the shelter's new initiatives. People can change, sometimes for the better. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Sullivan. Victoria's done well here. Started as a resident, worked her way up, really transformed herself. She's asked about you and the kids a few times. Never pushed, just wanted to know if you were doing okay. Thought you should know. Love, Jane. I sat with that information for a while, remembering the frightened, desperate woman who'd called me a year ago. The one who'd learned the hard way that karma comes full circle. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Amanda, Emma and Nathan, I saw your Christmas card photo on Mrs. Sullivan's desk. The kids have grown so much and you all look so happy. It made me realize how much damage I caused, trying to keep up appearances while tearing apart real family bonds. The night I kicked you out was the worst thing I've ever done. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I am truly, deeply sorry. The person I was then, entitled, selfish, cruel. I don't recognize her anymore. I don't want to. Living at the shelter, hearing other women's stories, it changed me. Made me see how privileged and petty I've been. Every night, when new residents arrive scared and hopeless, I remember you standing in that snowstorm with your children. I use that memory to fuel my commitment to be better, to help others. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to re-enter your lives. You've built something beautiful without me, and I respect that. I just wanted you to know that losing everything helped me find myself, and in some way, I have you to thank for that. The Kids Art Scholarship Fund I mentioned in the news, it's named after Emma and Nathan. Every year, it'll help children at the shelter pursue their creative passions, the same ones I once mocked you for supporting. Take care, Victoria. I folded the letter carefully, thinking about cycles of hurt and healing, about how sometimes people need to lose everything to understand what really matters. That evening, as I watched Emma help Nathan with his art project, a family portrait for his school's exhibition, I made a decision. I picked up my phone and typed out a message. Asterisk Victoria, thank you for your letter. The scholarship fund is a wonderful idea. The kids have an art show next month at the community center. If you'd like to come, you're welcome. No pressure, just an open door. Amanda asterisk. Her response came quickly. I'd be honored, but only if you're all truly comfortable with it. The last thing I want is to disrupt your peace. I smiled, recognizing that this was indeed a different Victoria. One who had learned to put others first, to respect boundaries, to understand that trust must be earned. We'll start with the art show, I replied. Take it from there. Later, tucking the kids into bed, Emma asked about the letter. Are we really going to let Aunt Victoria come to our show? I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes people make terrible mistakes, then work very hard to become better. When they do, it's okay to give them a chance to show their change is real. But it's also okay to take it slow, to protect our hearts. She nodded thoughtfully. Like in my art class, Mrs. Bennett says mistakes can become beautiful if you learn to work with them instead of hiding them. Exactly like that, I smiled, kissing her forehead. As I turned out the lights, I thought about second chances and fresh starts, about how sometimes the worst storms can clear the way for new growth. Victoria would never again be the person I trusted with my children's safety, but maybe she could become someone different, someone who understood the value of kindness, the weight of consequences, and the true meaning of family. After all, the best revenge isn't just about getting better. Sometimes it's about making the world a little better too.